the style of the adaptation and the tone of the adaptation is similar to The Servant of Two Masters in that we will be making contemporary references. My writing partner Odette and I enjoy that mixture of some of the aspects and fun that comes from doing a period piece, and then also really reflecting the relevance that all those things that happened in this case, 300 plus years ago, they still have relevance today, and they still have their contemporary counterparts. So certainly the healthcare crisis, the healthcare issue that's going on in our country, and all the political wrangling and just cultural questioning about what is the best way for a society to deal with illness, to deal with health issues, is something that's so much on our mind now and was on Molière's mind as well. So we'll be looking at that and looking into that in this adaptation as well. So there will be a mixture of contemporary and period reflections and aspects in this. I was asked, what's the difference between Italian Commedia and the Commedia of Molière? And one of the big differences in those two plays and those two styles has to do with the fact that Italian Commedia primarily was created for and by the people. It was performed in town squares. It was performed for just the general audience that might be in any town. Whereas Molière created plays for King Louis XIV and his court. So he was commissioned by the court. The plays he wrote were in many ways meant to entertain and please the king. So even though he was drawing from those same Commedia roots and in many ways drawing from those same Commedia archetypes as far as characters go and storylines in a way, he was still writing with that in mind. And to me, there's something very interesting about the convergence of theater that's made for the people and theater that's made for the court. Shakespeare also walked a line between those two audiences that he was writing for and being paid to write for. So I think that much like Shakespeare's work, I think that for Molière, it's a very interesting duality in a way, and I think that the strains of both those types of theater that come into this piece, I feel very interested in kind of looking at how it affects the piece as a whole. So one of the things that we're looking at is the design of the piece, and in part because the piece will have music and songs, and for this piece in particular, Molière wrote what he called interludes, which are pieces of music that were ballets or pastorals that were performed at the beginning, before the play began, and at the end, and at certain points in between, meant to be kind of little entertainments for the king, little breaks in the action where something would happen, a dance or a song, and then the play would resume. So we're interested in looking at that form here with music and dance, and using it as an opportunity to look at what the contemporary expression of a piece of theater that's bringing courtly theatrical aspects to it, and also very accessible, populist aspects to it. So we began looking at the Baroque period, and of course this is when the play was written. So of course that will be reflected in much of the design and the music and certain aspects in here, but also we were wondering how will we represent sort of populist strain that's coming from the Commedia. And we began to think about popular music of the 20th century, and in particular some of the music that was happening in France in the 1960s, which was sort of the era of Serge Gainsbourg and the era of Brigitte Bardot and some of those kind of icons. It was the time when Godard's movie Breathless was happening, which became kind of a seminal part of what they called the French New Wave in cinema. So this was a very fruitful time for French design and French aesthetic in the world, much like the Baroque period was during Molière's time. So we're looking at that period as far as music and design goes, and playing with that, that look and feel that was happening in France up against this kind of Baroque period, and also putting it through, of course, today. And what ends up actually coming to fruition remains to be seen, how that's actually going to look when the play opens. But those are kind of our starting points for exploration. So we'll see. Molière himself was a notorious hypochondriac, strangely, and he was a well-known figure in the French society. He was a bit of a celebrity. He certainly was the most famous playwright of his time, and many other playwrights were sort of jealous of his relationship with King Louis. So he was often ridiculed for his hypochondriac tendencies, and that was part of what gave him the motivation to write sort of a self-parodying answer to all of his critics who had made fun of him for being a hypochondriac. Ironically, he actually was sick. He had consumption, and he was actually quite sick by the time the play opened. Molière, of course, acted in many of his plays, often playing the lead. So in the production of The Imaginary Invalid, when it opened, Molière was playing the role of the invalid himself for the king, and his company performed the play 4 times, and on the 4th night of the performance, Molière was overtaken with a consumptive fit of coughing and collapsed on stage and actually died later that night. So he really was sick, and this was, of course, his final play. And it's a very strange irony that I found fascinating, always. So strange, one of those very interesting stories of the theater that are actually stranger than fiction. And so in this production, we're putting a little reflection of that in, a little touch of that in, and you'll have to come to the play and see what we do with that. But it's a very interesting story.